Gary, thank you very much for coming on my interview today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
What I'm going to talk to you about today is obviously I've interviewed you before. We know you're Barry Tomes, you're a publicist. You own Gotham Records, Tomes PR, and you run Barry Tomes Media Group.
That's
What I want to talk to you about today is about the music landscape because I'm doing some research at the moment about actually how the music landscape has changed. And I thought you would be one of the ideal people to come on and to talk about this. Now we obviously know that your history. You know, you worked with Elvin Stardust. You went with
lots of
your
people, yeah.
you went with your wife to a TV show, and obviously you met Elvin. You met him backstage after the TV gig. I want to talk about today's sector and
hmm
how, compared to today's sector, when you got the opportunity to drive Lulu around and etc. and stuff like that, it was a lot more easier back then. And I'm just wondering, do you think people of today in the music landscape have it a lot more tougher?
I don't think it was easier, Alice. I don't agree there. It wasn't easy. It was just different, and it was completely different then. The music business has never been easy to get into, ever. Not since the 60s or 50s or whatever. It was different because what's happened now, we rely so much on technology. Just look at you and me. We were just trying to connect, and it took us about 20 minutes, not because of us, but because of the technology. So when I started, and you've got to bear in mind, I've gone through 54 years, so you're only very, very young. I'm 70 years old. I've gone through a lot of changes. Now, when I started, I was at school. I used to see bands in the school hall, and I loved that. Then I became a DJ at the school and ran a radio station. So that was just normal progress at school. You met people, you met musicians, and they worked with you, and you worked with them, and you grew up together. And then we all went our separate ways after school. I loved music. I was a big fan of T Rex and people like that. As you mentioned at the beginning, I got to meet Alvin Stardust at a television show. A week later, I was selling posters at his gig. And then within 6 months, I was running his fan club. So that was fairly easy. That route was fairly easy because I love music. I was happy to get on a coach to go to Manchester, which, a lot of teenagers wouldn't do then. You wouldn't do that back in the day. You didn't have mobile phone, you didn't have access to internet or anything like that. So I wouldn't say it was easier. It's just different. Where I think the failings are, where it's changed, where the landscape has changed, let's start with that. Back in the 60s, lots of managers that would have managed the likes of, and you may not know these names, but they're big industry names, Herman Zermitz and Cliff Richard, people like that.
Yep, I
They
know them.
often had, yeah, they often had managers who managed them and paid them a salary. It wasn't similar as it is now. They would pay them a salary. So the managers really run the business side of things. The artists sometimes you got a fixed wage. Even S Club 7 are talking about that in the papers today. They made millions, but only got about £150,000 a year as a salary. Now, that was because their manager took control of everything and owned most of it. Now, what's happened now is we used to make a lot of money from selling records, and there was cassettes. Then there was a thing called 8 tracks, you may not remember. There was mini discs, and then, of course, CDs came onto the thing. So there was lots of different ways of money coming in. Now, vinyl's become very big and very popular again. It's the growing sector. It's one way of making money. Back in the 70s, bands and artists were really just into their music and their gigs. They didn't understand the business. They didn't understand how you made money from publishing. They probably didn't understand about getting the value of getting a piece of music into television or a TV show, say a film or an advert. So that was where the revenues were coming in. Now, a lot of them revenues have gone now. A lot, CDs aren't released. You've got all the streaming services, which you get, 100,000 streams, and you think, my God, what am I doing? I'm getting 8 pence for 100,000 streams.
Yeah, I know.
So that's where the landscape has changed. Where artists, in my opinion, are failing. All through the 60s and then into the 70s, artists were saying, I want more control of my career. I've got a manager, I pay an agent, the record company take a load of money. And Now artists have got that. They've got exactly what artists were asking for 30, 40 years ago, but they don't know what to do with it. That you see, when you've got a record deal in the, say, I did record deals in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. I never did a record deal in the 60s. I was too young. But when you got a record deal and you got an advance of the money, and the record company would give you, it might be £100,000, and you'd go off and make an album. Now, if you went to your bank and said, I want to make a record, I've written some great songs, and it's going to cost £30,000 to record it, even if you could persuade your bank manager to give you the money, I don't think they would, but even if you could, and they're a big music fan, and they gave you the money, you'd go off, you'd record the album, you'd release the album, you'd spend another 30 or £40,000 manufacturing CDs and discs and vinyl. And then if it completely failed, your bank would still want the money back. You'd still have to pay the money back because it was a loan. So you'd have to pay it back. Whereas with the record company, they would give you 100,000, 200,000. I mean, often in the 80s, I got £20,000 advance for one song, just one song. You wouldn't get that now. You just wouldn't get it. So, but when you got that money, it was given to you on the understanding that if you made a profit, the record company would take that £20,000 back. But if you didn't make a profit, they wouldn't take the money back and they wouldn't ask for the money. It was what they used to call a recoupable but non-returnable deal. In other words, if they gave you 30,000 to make an album and the album made 31,000, they would recoup the 30,000 that they gave you first. There would be 1,000 left, and you would split that based on what your royalty are, 70-30 split with the record company, whatever it is. So that's how that worked. And it was a good system because lots and lots of artists got lots and lots of money out of record companies, and without the threat of having to pay it back. They didn't have to pay it back. But of course, they didn't have the control, and they wanted the control. So as the 80s came, music and bands changed dramatically. We went into an area where DJs were the big stars. Instead of having groups and four-piece groups, you had DJs that became big stars, and they were getting £20,000 advances to mix one song. So the landscape changed then. Musically, it became a lot more DJ, backing tracks kicked in. It wasn't live. We then went back to the 90s, and then you got the indie bands came on board. That, at the end of the 80s, about 87, 88, I realised that the big record companies would do it differently, and they wouldn't keep giving you money all the time. So I started my own record label, and I made a lot of money, certainly through the 80s and the 90s, and still make some money, but very little money compared to what we did. What has actually happened, if you look historically at the whole music business over the last 50 years, managers went out, a lot of groups they didn't even sing on their own records, they were just groups put together. Like the Monkees was a TV show, but, they're still touring. Mickey Dolenz still tours 60 years later. Managers took the majority of the money. The record company then, in the 70s, probably took the majority of the money. Into the 80s, there weren't so many artists, and a lot of students weren't seeing the live bands as such that we was. So the landscape's always changed. Where I think it's changed for the worst, yes, the internet is great and it gives you some opportunities, but it's also stolen the money. Now, when I would have a record, say a dance record, although I was really into rock, I released a lot of dance records because they were profitable. And I would release a dance record all over the world under license. Excuse me. Now, what would happen? Japan might give me $500 to $5,000 for the record. Germany would give me $2,000. France would give me $2,000. And all around the world, I remember in 1997, we had a non-hit record called Every Little Time. And that was a non-hit at the time, but it was released all over the world, and we made £47,000. Well, you could buy a house in the 90s for 47,000.
I know. It was that easy.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, back then.
Yeah. So then artists, we want control. Somebody brought in the internet, and it was a British man that invented the internet. I don't know if you know that, but it's actually a British guy that discovered the internet, and obviously the Americans grabbed it by the shoulders and said, we're going to make a load of money. So then into the sort of 2000s when the internet started to grow, you had suddenly people realized they could put things online and they were illegal, and they were giving away tracks, and suddenly you were seeing your tracks all over the world, but you weren't getting money. But the artists had more control because they could record the song cheaply using technology. They could release the song quite cheaply on things like iTunes, and then of course later on Spotify came on. So all of a sudden, an artist like a local artist, say from Birmingham, a little band, they could release their record on this coming Friday on, say, Spotify, iTunes, whatever, the same day as Madonna. Now, Madonna would release a record the same day. It means you're in the same record store because it's not like Woolworths or Our Price Records. It's actually a digital distribution. So all of a sudden, the artists have all got this great control. Well, I want to manage myself. I'll be my own agent. Why should I pay an agent 15%? Why should I pay a manager 25%?
Yeah.
And and I had my record label, as I said, from 1987. And round about probably early 2000s, I realized that we were going to make less and less money from the actual record side of business. And I thought, right, I'm not going to leave the music business because I love it. It's everything I want to be in. How do I make money and stay in the business and keep my record company going? Now, I'd already, as a record company boss, I'd already promoted the bands, created stories, created biogs for the bands, and got them into the press, got them to meet people internationally and say, look, although you're from Birmingham, it's quite possible to get this record released in South Africa, or this record could be. And I had a record label in the Middle East of all places, right across, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Jebel Dana, Bahrain. I had a record company there, and a lot of people weren't releasing music in the Middle East at the time. So we had this period, I think, of about 20 years from the early 2000s to early 20 something, where artists suddenly got control. Oh, I can choose the cover. I can choose the song. I can choose the next single. I can decide the title of the album. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if you are creative and you are brilliant. But Alice, everybody's not brilliant at everything. An artist might be a great singer, not a good guitarist. A band may be a great band, but not good songwriters. A band may be great songwriters, but not great live. So collectively, it worked well having managers, agents, promoters. You had singing coaches came in the sort of 20s because of the likes of X Factor. That became quite a big thing. And that's not a bad thing because schools they don't do music lessons anymore, which I think should be compulsory in my opinion.
Yeah.
So we had this, and I'm kind of telling you a story over 50 years, really, and that's a long time because you're nothing like that age.
Yeah.
So where the artist suddenly got the control, and they suddenly say, "Well, I'll choose the name of my album." Might not be a great name, might be their favourite name, might be their name of their pet dog, might be important to them, but it didn't work aesthetically in the industry. An artist would choose a song. Now, I can't tell you the hundreds, I mean hundreds of times. I used to get, on average, to my office in Rubery, about 200 CDs and cassettes every month sent to me for bands wanting a record, or 200 through the post. Now it's done, MP3 and digitally. I can't tell with the amount of times that I got sent an album and the band would say, "Here's my new album, there's 10 tracks, and the new single is track 3." So I'd go to track 3, because that's the new single, and think, right, this is the song that the band think is what best represents them, what best promotes this album. And I tell you, I bet you 6 to 8 times out of 10, they were wrong. They were totally wrong. The album was too personal to them. They didn't. I don't have skin in the game when I'm listening to something new. I'm just listening to it as a record company boss. Most important for me, I listen to it as a music fan. I'm not a musician. I don't write songs. I just know if the song is good to me. Artists have been given control of their careers, and a lot of them aren't doing very well because of it.
It's really interesting you say that, Barry, because I've known other people in the industry and they said the same thing, really. That, as you said, a lot of the artists start to say, oh, I can be, a publicist and start to write my own press releases, but they haven't,
Yeah,
as you said, they haven't got the skill in
that's right.
training
You're
PR.
right, Alice. The skill is the word that you're on. You are on the money. They don't
Exactly.
have the skill in that specific area because nobody knows everything apart from me. But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's I've had to learn all of the things, and I make most of my money now as a publicist, and I make very big money as a publicist because I'm clever at headlines, in particular headlines. Like I had a band on. TV show on Friday on a boat in London on the Thames, and the guy was from Kentucky. We got the offer of a piece in the Daily Sport yesterday, and the guy said, "Oh, tell me a little bit about him." I said, "He's from Kentucky, he does bluegrass. He's only doing 5 shows." He said, "Give me an headline," and I put Kentucky, but not as we know it. That was the instant headline. And what that means is, if you and me are having a cup of tea and say, "Do you fancy Kentucky?" We'd be having Kentucky Fried Chicken, wouldn't we?
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
we'd
yeah,
assume. But
yeah,
because he was from Kentucky, I played on the name of Kentucky to the British audience, which is Kentucky Fried Chicken.
yeah,
But he was from Kentucky, and the paper immediately accepted that headline. And I always
exactly.
say an headline is a pound sign. I always say that.
Yeah, it's always about the actual headline, and that's a lot what other people have said to me in the industry as well. It's about, do they know how to write a headline that is going to be
Yeah,
catchy? Because there is an argument that people will say out there on the internet, oh, publicists charge,
a lot of
X
money.
amount, I can do it ourselves. And then there's stuff on the internet saying, oh, the Spotify playlist will do it for you, this will do it for you. But I think, to be honest with you, Barry, I 100% agree with you. And I've got people that I know in the industry that are very big that will probably agree with you as well. Or I
Mm-hmm.
know that do, will agree with your point. Because the trouble is, what's happening, as you said, is that we're having a situation where the musicians and bands are coming along and they want to do everything.
All of us, Alice, have a certain amount of energy, some more than others. I got up at 4:30 this morning. I'll probably go to bed about 1 a.m. and I'm 70 and I'm full of life, right? Not everybody has that same amount of enthusiasm or energy. So if you're trying to write an album and you're trying to think of some new lyrics for a song, and then suddenly there's 2,000 newspapers that you could possibly speak to about your new album, and you've still got to choose a title of the album, and what should we wear on stage, and how will we get to Sheffield? Will we miss a train back from Sheffield? Should we have a van? Can we afford a van? How much is the fuel? There's a lot of decisions that take up your energy. And
Exactly, yeah.
in my opinion, an artist should not spend his time walking around looking for paint. He should be doing the art.
I think a lot of it, at the end of the day, is down to the fact of obviously we have our digital, you know, platforms
Yeah.
come in, and a lot of the time I see on the internet for the last year and a half, actually, I've seen a lot of people say, musicians don't need PR, they can do it themselves, they can do this, they can do that. But in actual fact, at the end of the day, Barry, it's to do with one thing. They will
Yeah.
say, the musicians and bands will say, as a counter argument, we don't get enough money from Spotify. So how can we pay the publicists? But the way I look at it is a bit like a holiday, If you're going to want to have a publicist and they cost X amount for the time and
You
experience,
save up, you save up like you're
yeah,
going on
yeah,
holiday. You
that's
save
a
for the
hundred
holiday,
percent.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
totally.
100% like I've done with my holiday this year at the end of the day. So, that's 100% what you do. But I think a lot of these musicians just going, no, I'll do this, I'll do that, and I'll do that. And I honestly agree with you because when I was researching the papers, like over the last few days and, researching sources, links to do this interview with you, a lot of it is from both counter sides. But
Mm,
you got to musicians have got to understand a publicist. At the end of the day, they've been trained. Some have gone
yeah.
to education, done masters, PhDs, and stuff, so
Hmm.
they know what they're doing at the end of the day. And I think this is the big problem, is because the musicians don't have a lot of money. They're saying, well, to save money, we'll do X, Y, and Z at the end of the day. And as someone I spoke to quite recently, who's been quite big in the industry, who's also going to come on and do an interview at some point, have said, do they really have the skills at the end of the day and the talent to deliver that at the end of the day? I mean, promoters and PRs at the end of the day do so much, for musicians, bands, groups at the end of the day. That is a big job. I mean, I know from promoting some of my artists at the end of the day, from now, getting a freelance role at Liberty. PR. I know how hard that's going to be at the end of the day. I just don't know how the musicians and artists do it. And I think the problem is if we could fix Spotify and the streaming platforms, I think to be honest with you, we wouldn't see a lot of this. But as
No.
you said, we can't have it being a thing where, oh, I haven't got a lot of money, so I'm not going to afford a publicist. Because at the end of the day, as you said, is going to have to come to a stage now where, publicists and PR people, they do have the right to charge.
Off the top of your head, how many newspapers do you know that you could access or email? How many?
Off the top of my head, I know about two or three.
I have access to 10,000.
That's what I'm saying.
10,000. I would speak to maybe 15 newspaper journalists a day minimum. That's just on a normal day. How you doing? What's the latest story? What's happening? What's going on? And that is because I've been doing it for all the years and I know how to find the people. And even if you send an email, if I send an email and it's got Tomes PR on and there's 10 other emails, I would imagine out of the 10, I'm probably in the top two or three that's definitely going to get read. They're not going to read the others because some days I get 200 emails now. I don't have time to read 200 emails. So I prioritize based on who it's coming from. But the things I'd like the industry to fix, I'd like the bigger names like the Ed Sheerans and the Elton Johns that do make money on Spotify to make a stand and say, stop. You've got to look after the new young artists that are coming along because they are the future. We won't make records forever. If you want an industry, you're going to need to have new artists. I'd like bigger artists. If you imagine how many Beatles records get played all over the world in a day and £60 paid for every play on every radio. Let's say that, right? Can you imagine if Paul McCartney said, right, everyone around the world listen to me, and they would, because he's Paul McCartney. And he said, tomorrow, I don't want any of you to play a Beatles song. I want every single station where you were going to play a Beatles song, play a new artist from your area, from your town, from your village, from your city. How amazing would that be? I believe the
Yeah.
elder statesmen in the industry don't do enough for young artists. Spotify, say they pay, but they don't pay anything like what's right. But also, it's education. Young people don't want to pay for a record. I paid all the time. I used to get 50 pence to go to pick a prescription up for a friend of mine. I'd walk about a mile, save spending the money on the bus. I'd walk back, give her a prescription, and I'd spend 32 pence on a record because she gave me 50 pence. That's how much a single was then.
Yeah, exactly. I remember
And
the
but
days when I used to.
artists also, there's too many free gigs being done. There's too many venues that I'll give you some exposure. Yeah, well, I'll have a free drink then, expose that brand or whatever. So I don't think enough people make a stand, but the people that are going to make a difference, it's not young bands and new bands from Northfield or from Sheffield or from Glasgow. It's the big guys that have got more money than they're ever going to need, ever, could just say, we are going to start working with the lower end and we're going to help them. Can you imagine how many new artists would get a play on a radio? There must be
Oh yeah.
many, many, many thousand record labels, radio stations every day playing a Beatles record. Just imagine if they all played a new band. Wouldn't that
It'd
be
be
amazing?
amazing. Yeah,
And that's what
amazing.
needs to happen. That's what needs to happen. The older statesmen need to step up now and put something back. And I'm not saying none of them do, but I just don't think they do enough. I think the likes of Spotify and all those should be regulated against, so they can't keep taking money for nothing. The internet is the Wild West, so it's very difficult to know what you're doing. If you know some stuff, you can get some good stuff, get good promotion. I can reach out to somebody around the world, get a contract done within 10 minutes. Whereas we used to have to use FedEx and it would take 2 or 3 days back and forth. So the landscape's changed, but it will change. It always changes. I just find that now we do, of course, we have the big venues, the major venues. I find that new intimate venues are becoming really popular with artists. You take Shania Twain, she wanted to play a pub in London a couple of weeks ago. She's doing 12 nights with Harry Styles at Wembley. But I bet you she got more of a thrill from that gig in the pub with 200 people. And then she went back to where she was from and she asked if she could play a pub there because when she was a new artist, they would never give her a gig. So she went back as a big star and said, give me a gig. And of course, they're going to give Shania Twain a gig.
problem is also with this, on the flip side of it, is that if we have a situation where everyone's not going to a record company, publish and everything, the music industry will just shrink. There'll be
It's
no
shrink. It,
jobs.
it is shrinking anyway, and that's why I say you've got. And also, it's not just that it's shrinking. When I was at my record label, say 1987, every week, on average, about 400 new releases were put out. Right, about 400 every week. But if you went to the top 75, which was on Radio One at the time, there were only about eight to 10 new entries. So say there was 10 new entries that week. That means 390 songs didn't make it. But now there are thousands released every week. So the good stuff's getting buried because there's no quality control. There's no A&R people. There's, me and you could do a duet now. I would sound like a howling cat being murdered. You'd be better than that. But we could release a record on Spotify, right? And that takes up the space of a really talented artist. That's why I don't pretend to be a singer. I don't
Yeah.
pretend to be an artist or musician. I know what I'm good at. And I'm good at a record label. I'm good at management. I'm good at being a publicist. I started as a tour manager, which taught me a lot for 10 years with Alvin, Lulu, Right Said Fred, Shaking Stevens, people like that. And that taught me a lot about the industry, and it made contacts for me. But it's evolution. You can't keep looking back and say that's how it used to be. Not you can't look back and say that's how it used to be. I wish I could do it that way. You've got to do it the way it is now. But if you have a cheap solicitor, you'll probably lose your court case, right? Yeah.
Mm.
If you buy cheap paint, it'll probably peel off after the first winter.
Yeah,
If you
exactly.
buy a cheap car, it will probably break down.
Yeah, I see where we're going here. Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what you've got to say. I'm going to save up for that one holiday a year, like you said, and I'm going to
Yeah.
put all the money to do one big single release to get the maximum exposure. And the thing is, a lot of people forgot we're supposed to enjoy the music business. It's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's
I
so
mean,
busy fighting each other and competing. It
I
stopped
know,
being
I
fun.
know. I mean, just to ask you a quick question, what are your three tips for publicists going out there today wanting to actually promote bands and be successful?
For a publicist, you need a story. People like stories, but you don't need a long biog anymore. We used to send out a biography, two A4 pages. No, people are too bored. People get too bored quickly because they've got a phone or an iPad. Your You shouldn't do a biog now. I was born in, I grew up and wore long trousers. It should be bullet points. Just the 10 best things about you, the band, where you're going, what you're doing, what you've achieved. That's important. Go for bullet points rather than a biography. If somebody wants to know where you were born and where your dad was born and what school into, they can research it. So don't bother telling them that because it's not relevant. Tell them what you do, where you're going, what your ambitions are, who you've played with. I shared the stage with such and such a guitarist. Such and such an artist sent me a lovely email because he heard my song. They're the things. That's the important thing. Communication is the best thing. It's the best thing. And most importantly, is if you want to make it, you can't stop. You have to give me. I'm 70 years old. And mentally, I still feel 17. I'm still as excited when I first saw Alvin Stardust on telly, and a week later when I was selling T-shirts and badges and posters, and I saw more cash than I'd ever seen in my life coming across the table.
Yeah.
Maintain your enthusiasm. This will sound weird. Keep off the drink and drugs. They don't help, right? By all means, have a drink and celebrate. Keep off those things. You never finish up in a great place if you're an heavy drinker, or you finish up in a great place if you take drugs. They're the things to avoid. You don't need a lot of sleep if you're creative. Creative minds, they want to be awake 20 hours a day. I only sleep an average of 4 hours. As I said, I got up at 4:30 this morning. I was doing press by 5. I'll probably go to bed at 1. So just really keep going. And most important, be honest with yourself. Are we actually any good? Because your family will tell you you're good. You'll go to a talent competition and all your friends will scream and all your friends will cheer and the judges will let you win because you had the loudest screamers. But you need to play to an unknown audience because if they accept you, then you're good. If your family are screaming at the local talent competition and the local judge that's never been in the music business is a butcher, he gives you a prize and you win the first 500 quid prize, that doesn't help your career. be honest. Is it the best thing you could do? Now, you can be in the music business in lots of ways. Of course, you might want to be in a band and be a rock star and get loads of girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever you choose. However, you might be better as a tour manager. You might be better as a publicist. You might be better as a manager. So if it's the music business that's drawing you in, evaluate whether you could do something better. Quite a few. I mean, from Bros, Warner Bros now is a big management company. He manages major artists like Pink. He manages, I think he just took over S Club 7 from Simon Fuller. And he was in a band that everybody took the mickey out of back in the day. But he's there because he's realised he can do better now as a manager, having learned from the last 25 years, than he can as an artist. So just keep believing in yourself. Listen to people that know, even if you don't agree with them, listen to them, right? That's an important thing. You don't have to agree with anybody, but if you listen to them on a quiet day, one day on a train, you'll think, that Barry Tomes, he was right. And then you can get motivated to go another way. But just keep going, really, Alice. Like you never stop. Blimey, you never stop. You're on this and television, latest TV, this. I've got to take that. I'll be doing that.
I know.
You probably play guitar in your sleep.
But I know. I think a lot of people think about that on my social media. Well, before we know it, you'll be on the 6 o'clock news. At the end of the day,
and that's fine. And I applaud you for it. I applaud you. You do a great job. And the thing is, you believe in yourself. And that's important. You've got to believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, why should anybody else believe in you?
Well, also, Barry, I believe in myself, but I'm very lucky to have a lot of people in my network
that support you. Yeah, of course.
Believe in me.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, that is important.
People like yourself. I met a couple of people a few months ago. It's been brilliant and been supportive, and that these are the people that also, as well as me believing in myself, keep me there as well at the end of the day.